Welcome to the show. It is Budweiser's weekday sports beat along with irishbreakdown.com. My name is Sean Stiers. I am joined by Jesse Stiers. We're very color coordinated today. We're both wearing the same trucker caps, and we both got blue shirts on today. We almost blend into the background on the YouTube live there. How are you today?
Doing a lot better than Monday. The Monday blues are gone. The post-bachelor party blues are gone. I'm in the full swing of being back in work.
Oh, sounds like a good time. Sounds like a good time. Speaking of good times, we have 1 week to go, 7 days until the start of Notre Dame fall training camp, 38 days to go until the season opener. We got the official Notre Dame football training camp schedule today. We're not allowed to talk about all the details on, publicly, whether it's on air, on Twitter, social media, any of that different kind of stuff. But Camp Des open 1 week from today. We'll have a full practice availability, and we'll get to talk to Fighting Irish head coach Marcus Freeman afterwards. So, I mean, really, that's all I've got to know at this point. We've got a couple of different things we're going to talk about in this first hour. Notre Dame got a big commitment from a quarterback today named Teddy Jarrard, and Bryan Driskell from irishbreakdown.com is going to join us in about 25 minutes or so to talk about Mr. Jarrard and the commitment. He's from the 2027 class. This is a big one. He chose Notre Dame over some pretty select schools. So a big commitment coming today for the Fighting Irish on the recruiting trail. We're going to start off, though, talking a little bit about Notre Dame's offseason. Let me first ask you this, Jesse. Does the offseason end at the start of training camp or when they actually play the first game? When does the offseason end as far as you're concerned?
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, the offseason ends when training camp starts. That's when the team is in full preparation for the season, roster spots, depth chart. There's going to be battles across the table. That's when it really gets down to the nitty-gritty, in my opinion. When we get to the first game, that's the final roster. That's the final depth chart. But you still have to get to that point, in my opinion. As someone who played college football for 3 seasons, I can tell you very much that the season starts when that fall camp starts, because there's nothing like it. You're in two-a-days, you're in film practice, you're nonstop.
I don't even think you have to play college football. Like, I think you play any sport. Your season officially begins the first day of practice, like whenever the first official day of practice is, whether it's high school football, baseball, basketball, wrestling, whatever your sport happens to be, and obviously into college in the NFL. I realize from a fan standpoint, fans aren't there at practice, so they don't get to see it. So maybe the perception is a little bit different. Maybe for everyone else, it's when the season actually kicks off. But I think that for the players, for the coaches, anyone who covers it, the off season, I think for us, officially ends 1 week from today when training camp begins. That's how I look at it. And, there's just the table is officially turned on last season at that point, and everything is about what's going to happen with this team this season. So
it's incredible that we're a week away from August. It feels like we just played in that national championship game.
Yeah, it does. I think them going deeper into the postseason, it obviously shortens the offseason a little bit by almost a month, basically. But we're talking about that's only been 6 months ago that happened. Vince and I were talking yesterday about the road trip that we took with his son Dylan down to the national championship game there and back. And it flew. Time flew by. Here we are. We're not quite on the eve, but we are on the verge. Well, with that, I wanted to kind of put a little bit of a sort of a final touch on the offseason. And Athlon did a list of the top 10 teams that they say won the offseason. They didn't actually rank the top 10 teams. They just put them in alphabetical order. And then they also had 7 more teams in the next tier after that. So here are Athlon's, what they say are the top 10 college football teams that won the offseason in alphabetical order. It went Alabama, Auburn, Clemson, Illinois, LSU, Miami, Oklahoma, Oregon, Penn State, and Texas Tech. And then their next 7 teams went Arizona State, Florida State, which I find it pretty interesting, Indiana, Michigan, Missouri, Ole Miss, and Texas. So what did you notice when you see that list of a full 17 teams that Athlon says won the college football offseason?
Well, I mean, obviously, the first and foremost, Notre Dame is not on that list. So
correctamundo. That's all I was looking for. You
very noticeable.
Won that round. Yeah, and I find it a little bit shocking, honestly, that Notre Dame isn't on the list. I mean, it does feel like they only went to 17, which I don't really understand. Like you couldn't come up with 3 more teams to tack onto the list because the teams in that second tier, there were literally like 2 sentences, either a long sentence or 2 sentences for each team. You couldn't tack on 3 more teams and do that. I would like to have seen if Notre Dame in their purview at least showed up in the top 20. They don't show up in the top 17.
So let me spin this a little bit, though. They say won the offseason. Shouldn't it be a good thing that Notre Dame didn't have to win the offseason, that they didn't have to make all of these key transactions and go into the portal to grab a lot of different players? To me, that states that Notre Dame's roster is actually in a healthy place, and Marcus Freeman and company has done a good job, really what I would say backloading with a lot of younger guys, on the team. Yeah, they lost a couple of pieces, but they still brought in some significant pieces like Malachi Fields at wide receiver. They addressed their key needs, but I just don't think they had glaring holes or setbacks like some of these other teams. And I think that's noticeable because Notre Dame obviously played in a national championship last season.
Okay, end of segment. We can go on. We'll just bring Bryan in. We don't need to talk about it anymore.
I guess, though, don't you kind of agree with that?
Yes, you put it all into perspective. Yeah, I do, because I don't think that, like, if you were looking at this, I'm a Libra, so like the scales are obviously an important thing. I don't know if your zodiac signs and all that stuff, but the Libra is the scales, like the balances of justice or whatever. So if you were doing this, like if you were weighting this, did anything really bad happen? I mean, the worst thing that probably happened was what? The injury to Charles Jagasaw, right? Can you come up with anything worse than that?
No, I can't come up with anything worse than that. And I think also they just didn't make a big splash in DC. No one really knows who Chris Ash is.
And maybe they hold that against Notre Dame a little bit, that they didn't make a big splash. They made a big splash at the running back position, though. You can argue that they got the best remaining running backs coach in college football by going out and getting J1 Sider from Penn State, right?
Yeah, and you combine him with what I would say is the nation's front runner to win the Heisman for the running back position. For the running back position.
And I say the best remaining running backs coach because obviously we all thought very highly of Dylan McCullough before he decided to go to the Raiders in the NFL. But yeah, so like Jagasaw's injury is really the only bad thing that happened. I do wonder. Well, let me backtrack a little bit first. Let me kind of, because like Justin in our live YouTube stream, and of course you can watch this show live on YouTube on either the Irish Breakdown channel or on the new Sports Radio WSBT YouTube channel. You can go to either of those places if you're driving around and you decide, hey, I'd like to see their ugly faces. You can just pull us up on the YouTube and there will be. But Justin in the YouTube comments says, what does won the offseason mean? That's a very good question, Justin. And they really don't define it, and like when you look at some of these teams that showed up on the list, there's really not a lot that jumps out, like for Alabama, I'll read you kind of condensed version of what they said. They went out and got a new offensive coordinator. Alabama did. Ryan Grubb. He was DeBoer's offensive coordinator at Washington, and he followed DeBoer to Washington, but then he was hired by the Seattle Seahawks. They fired him after one season. So they've got a new offensive coordinator who did, pretty well, obviously, at Washington. They got to the college football playoff. But then they also say, while the Crimson Tide lost a handful of players to the transfer portal, none of the departures were a significant setback. With a longtime assistant in Grubb returning to the staff, a high level of roster retention, a few key additions from the portal or standout freshman class, Alabama is poised to make a push to return to the top of the SEC. I mean, those are literally the highlights of what they said about Alabama. So Like, does that scream they're one of the top 10 teams in the nation in terms of who, quote unquote, won the offseason?
No, I just think that if you're Alabama, you obviously have a pool of talent on your team, and last year was maybe seen as a down season in DeBoer's first season. Obviously, Nick Saban's first season not coaching the University of Alabama, and so they got their guy to come back and be the offensive coordinator, and then they feel like they also address some needs in the transfer portal. So if you're Alabama and you kind of make a cocktail there of, okay, we got a talented pool of players already on the roster. We addressed our needs, and we got our OC that DeBoer trusts that he had at Washington. I feel like that's a good combination,
Yeah.
And if you're Alabama, you're probably feeling much better about your chances this season. And I don't disagree. I do think Alabama is going to find its way back to the top of the SEC. I don't think that means they're necessarily going to win it, but I think they'll be in the top 2 or 3 teams in the SEC.
We'll see. I don't agree with that right now. I think Kalen DeBoer has a lot of questions in terms of, look, I think he's a good coach. He's proven that. He won NAIA national championships, and he worked his way to Washington, where he took a Washington team to the playoff. And, that is not a team, obviously, that is a regular in the playoffs by any means. Now, he did inherit a lot there. And he got, like when we're talking about Grubb, he did get Michael Penix to transfer there, and he had Roma Dunze, so like all that factors in. I think that he's got a lot to prove in terms of how he recruits and how he goes about competing week in and week out in the SEC. Case in point, Vanderbilt last year. So now it's interesting because Don in the YouTube chat says if a college team had to win the offseason, they had many situations to correct. And that's the point I would make with Miami, because now they obviously didn't have to correct the quarterback, but they brought in a transfer portal quarterback last year, Cam Ward, who won the Heisman. He's gone now. So they brought in Carson Beck. Okay. That's like you're hoping that you see, continue to see immediate results with that. But then they also list in this article that they went out and got Tony Johnson from Cincinnati, Keelan Marion from BYU, and CJ Daniels from Liberty. And Daniels was actually at LSU after first starting at Liberty, but none of those guys put up any great numbers at any of the places they were at. They were, we're literally talking about 400 to 500 yard type wide receivers. That's it. And then they also say of Miami, a suspect secondary was the focal point of Cristobal's work in the portal. Miami landed 7 transfer portal defensive backs. Okay, that's great that you got them, but it's, as to Don's point, it's because they were a horrible secondary last year, and they had to get better there. And how are 7 guys going to come in and, and be completely cohesive in 1 year together? I think that's a big question, especially in game 1 of the season.
Yeah, I mean, let's just call a spade a spade. Carson Beck is not he's not impressive to me. I don't think that's necessarily winning the offseason. Yeah, you got a pretty good, of the transfer portal quarterbacks, he was probably up there, but I'm just so unimpressed with his game, to be honest with you. And I think he's going to struggle more in Miami with less talent around him. He's not going to have that Georgia roster around him anymore. And he still, wasn't an amazing player at Georgia, if you ask me. And then, it's like they had to – Miami could replace their whole defense, or they should have replaced their whole defense from last year. Mm-hmm. And like you said, how are you going to bring in a group of, a group of first-year guys at Miami and just expect them, okay, the defense is fixed at the end of the day? That's just not going to happen. And so that's why I think Notre Dame is at a clear advantage against Miami, and that game being week 1 helps Notre Dame so much more than Miami, because they're figuring it out at quarterback. They're figuring it out wide receivers. They're figuring it out all across their defense. And that's game 1 for that team. That's a whole roster that hasn't really played together. And now you're coming with this Notre Dame roster who has a ton of experience that has played well. And again, coming off a national championship.
Again, they've got Penn State on this list. Jim Knowles, you can't argue that wasn't a big coup for Penn State, particularly in the Big Ten. They kept Drew Aller, and that's kind of what, they're saying that they hung their hats on there. Again, like they went out and brought in some receivers. Trevor Pena from Syracuse is the best of them. And then like UCLA, they got Dante Moore. Okay. But then they're, like they mention how Dan Lanning went out. He says he addressed the biggest question marks on the defense by landing Bear Alexander. Like this dude is transferred across the country multiple times now. And this is supposed to be some big win for Oregon because you got Bear Alexander. Like that's going to shore things up for you. I'm not buying that at all.
One defensive lineman is just going to fix all of your problems.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so, like when you look at the portal, Notre Dame, they lose Spindler, they lose Pendleton, they lose Coogan. Okay. Significant guys who ended up playing the different, like Coogan and Spindler ended up obviously playing a lot because of injuries. Pendleton started at the beginning of the season, was out of the starting lineup down the stretch by the time Schrouth came back. They also lose Kennedy Urlacher, Steve Angeli, Ty Chan, Aiden Gobira, Deion Colsey, Jaden Thomas, and Tyson Ford. They gain Malachi Fields, Devontae Smith, Jared Dawson, Will Pauling, Ty Washington, the tight end, Jalen Stroman, the safety, the kicker Noah Burnett, and Elijah Hughes. So, again, like we don't know what they think of Notre Dame since they didn't mention the Irish at all, but by leaving them out, could they be putting too much importance on the portal losses since they mention like these other portal games? Like they got at least 3, if not 4, very significant Notre Dame did transfer portal guys coming in with Fields, Smith, Stroman, Will Pauling, and then, another kicker. Again, like Notre Dame is never going to have to go out and do what Miami did and bring in a whole secondary and a half, by bringing in all these different guys. They're very strategic with how they plug in holes, and it's literally almost like the equivalent of NFL free agency by being able to go out, get proven guys from the transfer portal to fill specific needs. So I don't feel like anything that happened in the portal is like, again, if I'm using my balancing scales, I don't feel like it tipped the scale in a negative way at all. Do you?
No, not a chance. I think Notre Dame, if you're balancing the losses and the gains definitely outweigh the losses. I'll be real with you. I think the only player that Notre Dame could potentially miss is Rocco Spindler. The rest of them,
yeah,
I have no problem saying goodbye to. Like, do I want players to leave? Of course not. Once you're an Irish guy, I'll always root for you. But at the end of the day, I think Rocco Spindler is the only guy. And I think a lot of people will say Pat Coogan, but Pat Coogan, people love him because he was the rah, motivational guy. I mean, when it's time
videos,
to strap up,
speeches, and all that.
Yeah, when it's time to strap up and hit someone, I that stuff goes nowhere. And I know Rocco Spindler would run through a wall for his running backs and quarterbacks.
Yeah, exactly. I was literally standing on the field, just maybe 30 feet from where Coogan was doing, some of his stuff, and I guess in another case even closer than that, like before the national championship game. Okay, it's great. Rah-rah and the speech and the whole thing didn't do him any good at the end of the day.
Wouldn't you say, though, that this offseason has probably been the least impactful when we're talking about players to leave? I feel like in the past there's always been at least a 4 or 5-star guy that has moved on. I don't really feel like that they lost a whole lot this year.
Some would tell you that the quarterback they lost to Syracuse was impactful. Some. Right? So, I mean, you could say that Jaden Thomas was proven productive. I don't really feel like they ever – now, again, those 3 offensive linemen are good offensive linemen. There's no doubt about that. They're all going to start at their new schools, Tennessee, Nebraska, and Indiana. But, again, the reason each of those 3 guys left is because of what Notre Dame has in the cupboard that we're going to see next Thursday when fall training camp begins. They're just a bunch of studs out there on the offensive line. That's one thing they've got is a ton of depth on the offensive line.
Yeah, and I mean
quality depth.
If you wanted to play devil's advocate, it probably hurts a little bit more now with what happened to Jagasaw a couple of weeks ago. Like, that having that kind of depth there between Pendleton and Spindler and Coogan probably stings a little bit. But like you said, if you're an upperclassman and you're transferring, there's a reason. It's because the young guys are knocking on your heels on the depth chart, and you're fully aware of that, and no one wants to be a 5th-year senior who has a legit shot at maybe going to the NFL and splitting playing time, or maybe not even getting any playing time. So, logistically it makes sense. But I think this just all goes back to the point I kind of made earlier on, is Notre Dame's roster is in such a healthy spot. And Marcus Freeman is recruiting unlike any coach that we've seen in a long time. So if you're Notre Dame, that's something, or Notre Dame fan, that's something that you should ultimately feel good about. And the other part of it is Notre Dame doesn't have a lot of in and out revolving door guys. Guys are staying here for 2, 3, 4 seasons, before they potentially transfer. Like, look at all these guys that did transfer: Colsey, Thomas, Angeli, Spindler, Pendleton, Coogan, all guys that were here for a good amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
Kennedy Urlacher is probably the only one where you could say, okay, a guy was in his first year, but we all know how that situation went down.
Yeah.
He got poached by, the guy
loaded room. You're in a loaded room, saw the writing on the wall, and got poached. And speaking of which, again, they only lose 2 coaches. Now they lose a considerable defensive coordinator in Al Golden with what he did, but and then they lose D'Lo McCullough as well. But they we'll find out about Chris Ash as this season goes on. Everyone feels real good about Jaywan Sider, but they lose Bowden to USC, the general manager. They replace him with Mike Martin from the Detroit Lions. They currently have the number 5 ranked recruiting class for this 2026 cycle. So it feels like, again, if you're evaluating off seasons, like where a team is and what they're doing in terms of recruiting should be a pretty significant part of that as well.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I think recruiting is the name of the game in college football. Just ask Nick Saban how he won so many national championships down in Alabama, because no one recruited better than Nick Saban at the end of the day. He stockpiled talent like no one else could. So that has to be a factor in this. And Marcus Freeman is just continuing to recruit at a super high level, even with the loss of Chad Bowden. And I like the replacement of Mike Martin. I like someone who comes from the NFL and has that actual GM being in a war room front office situation, because I think everything is more amplified at the NFL level. If you can do it at the NFL level and be successful, and now he can come down and, kind of be the head honcho for the Notre Dame department, I think that's great. And so, at the end of the day, was Chad Bowden significant? Sure. But I think I think his head got a little bit overinflated because he was still working along Marcus Freeman. Marcus Freeman's the guy at the end of the day that is really ultimately selling, himself and the program to these parents, in which, you can trust me as a man to lead your son. And then also you can trust, that this program is going to do a lot of good things and showcase, your son's ability to go on to the next level.
Yeah, I think that just overall, the offseason has tipped the scales much more positively than negatively, all things considered. So,
well, it's like you look at some of these teams on the list, and it's like you're telling me Texas really won the offseason. What did they do? They had 15 guys that went to the NFL and got drafted.
Again, Texas Tech. How did Texas Tech win the offseason? Because they decided to spend a lot of money?
Because they recruited well.
And that's my point. And if you're going to look at recruiting rankings, and we're going to talk some more specific recruiting, some big recruiting news of the day here in a minute. Now, there are multiple recruiting services, as Bryan Driskell will remind me, and they are ranked as high as 3rd in one, but they are top 5 in all of the current rankings for the 2026 class.
Doesn't this, to me, again, I just wouldn't want to be on this list, because the more you look at it, every team on here either underachieved last season or their coach is legitimately on the hot seat this season. And so if you read this list and you say, oh man, our team won the offseason, like if you're Brian Kelly at LSU, this puts more pressure on you. If you're Kalen DeBoer at Alabama, this puts more pressure on you in year 2. If you're Venables at Oklahoma, this puts you more pressure on you because you've been rumored to be on the hot seat. Mm-hmm. Same with Florida State. Same with Miami. I don't know how IU could be much better. I mean, they made the playoff last year. Michigan, you got a quarterback to commit. I mean, come on. Like, what are we talking about here? Sharon Moore still has a lot to figure out. So, Arizona State as well. It's like, yeah, they had a great season last year, but they're returning their top wide receiver. They're returning their top quarterback. So it's just like, to me, don't want to be on this list, because that means the roster and the state of the program isn't healthy, and it puts even more expectations on you for this upcoming season.
Yep, I can see that. All right. No anointing oils for the offseason. So I think it was – but again, I think it was a much more positive offseason for Notre Dame than any negative. You get to the national championship game, you only lose 2 assistant coaches. I think that's a win in itself. Like we didn't even mention the fact, I'll just mention it now, they kept Mike Mickens around, and look at how they can, how he and they continue to recruit the secondary as well. Speaking of recruiting, as I mentioned previously, big day for Notre Dame football today. They landed Teddy Jarrard, a quarterback commit from Georgia. Coming up next, we're going to talk with Bryan Driskell. You may know him from Irish Breakdown. That's on the way on Budweiser's weekday Sports Beat with Irish Breakdown.
This is Budweiser's weekday Sports Beat with IrishBreakdown.com on Sports Radio, WSBT.
And we return. And as I mentioned, going into the last break, big day in terms of recruiting for Notre Dame football today. They got a commitment from Teddy Jarrard, a quarterback in the 2027 class. And we bring in our resident recruiting expert. Can I call you an expert, Bryan? I don't think you'd have any problem with me calling you an expert.
Fan.
Recruiting fan?
No, I mean, I'm a fan of you calling me an expert.
Oh, okay. I got you. Big fan of that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this is like our first time doing this, you and I, on the radio in a little bit more than 3 years. When I left this position, when I was ushered out of this position 3 years ago, Bryan Driskell was the first guy to call me, and I've been employed at Irish Breakdown ever since. And that's kind of a big part of how this partnership came to be here on Weekday Sportsbeat back on WSBT. We used to talk, basically what we're going to do right now. We do a weekly recruiting segment together. And here we are 3 years later. Who would have thought that we'd be sitting here?
I missed it. I'm glad to be back doing this. It's going to be fun. They got Jesse rocking the IB hat. I'm ready to rock and roll, man.
Everybody's got their IB logos on today.
And Jesse's right. This is the kind of offseason you want to win. The recruiting offseason is the one you
right.
want to win.
If
you win the offseason, means you had more needs and more holes to fill. This is the winning you want to do is the high school recruiting.
I agree. Like we were saying, Miami, the fact that you had to replace a whole secondary, that seems like an issue on you.
It's probably not a good thing.
Their whole defense needed to be wiped out.
Big overhaul.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Teddy Jarrard. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes,
Teddy Jarrard. He spells it Jarrard. He is from Kennesaw, Georgia. They finally got their quarterback for the 2027 class. This had kind of been a question for a while. So just start off, Bryan, telling us something about Mr. Jarrard.
Well, he had a monster summer. I mean, he's a kid who's really seen his profile climb this summer with some really outstanding obviously summer camp workout performances. He did a camp early in June at Notre Dame. That's something that really got him on Notre Dame's radar as one of those top couple guys as he came in through on campus. I think it was the day before Irish Invasion and had a really impressive workout. Also competed at the Rivals Elite Camp this summer. He was one of the few 2027 kids. There was a lot of 26 kids. Joey O'Brien, who's committed to Notre Dame, was there. Javian Osborne, who's committed to Notre Dame, was there. Tyler Merrill, Gregory Patrick, other Notre Dame commits were there, and he won the quarterback competition, and that performance really vaulted him way up the rankings. So it's been a great offseason for him, and came down to Notre Dame, Georgia, Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan. It's a pretty good group of 5 right there.
Not bad.
And picked Notre Dame. So, yeah, and it happened a little over a month. They didn't get offered until June 21st, which is kind of part of the, okay, how's this new process going to work? They waited a long time to throw the offers out. They only offered 2 kids, and it was kind of like, well, if you're going to only offer 2 kids, you better get one of them, and they did. And this is a big pickup.
How big is it? Like, how important is this just, to get this guy?
It's huge. It's similar to getting CJ Carr a couple years ago. And I'm not trying to say that Teddy's as good as CJ. He's not quite there yet. But CJ was a very highly ranked recruit. Teddy Jarrard's the number 52 player in the country. According to On3, he's a top 100 player on the Irish Breakdown board. He's a kid that's from the South. He's well known. He's won the summer MVP. And we saw when CJ committed, all of a sudden, it's like, that big time quarterback can be like that Pied Piper to a class, especially when he's bought in. And after you get CJ, the 23 receiver class really fills out nicely. You get Cam Williams, you get Micah Gilbert, and that's always a great way to start your class. And of course, they have 2 other kids committed, but this is a really big early commitment. And when you can land a quarterback like that, look, Sean, it's like if you want to play with a great point guard, if you're a basketball recruit, right? I mean, you want to have that guy that says, okay, I'm a great center, I'm a great shooting guard, I'm a great 3, but I need that guy to get me the rock. And when you look at the way Notre Dame's recruited that position, that certainly helps with recruiting, but also kids want to have a kid in their class. And now when you're out there trying to get 5-star receivers like Quentin Burrell and Julius Jones Jr., yes, that Julius Jones Jr., who's a 5-star wide receiver from Florida, it's a lot easier when you've got a big-time quarterback in your class, and Teddy Jarrard is that.
I mean, even Jesse has to feel old when you hear Julius Jones Jr. We got used to seeing him in that Dallas backfield there for a while, a few years back. Compare what they've done in these last, what is it now? 5 cycles, I guess, through 2027 at this position. Like, is there anything that compares to it in recent memory for Notre Dame?
I mean, you had a stretch where you got Everett Golson in 2011, and then you got Gunnar Kiel in 2012. You got Malik Zaire in 13, Deshaun Kaiser 15, and then Brandon Wimbush in 15. That was a comparable one. But what this group is it's a lot more natural passers. There's a lot of dual threat guys in that group. Obviously, Everett was a dual threat. Malik was a dual threat. You're also seeing guys that coming out of high school are much more highly regarded. Ironically, the highest ranked recruit of that group of 5 was Gunnar Kiel, was the highest ranked guy, and then Brandon Wimbush was number 2. These are all highly regarded players, highly ranked players, guys that you're beating out the Georgias of the world and the Ohio States of the world to get. And look, some of them are going to pan out, some of them aren't. But what's changing with Notre Dame right now, Sean, at quarterback in a lot of positions is you're no longer just kind of like, well, I hope Tyler Buckner pans out, because if he doesn't, there's a drop off there. I hope this guy pans out, because if he doesn't, you're turning into somebody that's not going to go win you a championship. When you're stacking quarterback classes one after another like this, you have a greater chance of that continuity of big time play.
Because that's where it seemed like Notre Dame and the Kelly regime was obviously very inconsistent with. It's like, okay, you'd get the big gun this cycle, but the next cycle there might be a pretty precipitous drop in the kind of guy you were bringing in.
Like you go from the streak of, like I mentioned, from Everett on to Brandon, and then you follow that up with Ian Book, which they did not recruit Ian Book thinking he was going to be a 3-year starter in the all-time. I mean, they flipped him from Washington State. Then the next year you sign Avery Davis, a quarterback, instead of going after Sam Howell, who was at the same Irish invasion camp that Avery Davis was. And he ends up not lasting at quarterback for a year. You get Phil Dracovic the next year. He doesn't, pan out. You didn't develop him. Then you get Brendan Clark after that. And then it just was kind of this string of, Drew Pine they got after that. And then you finally get a big time quarterback in Tyler Buckner, and you just have some bad luck with multiple injuries and different things happening with him. And you just couldn't string back those classes back to back to back the way you needed to. And the problem back then too is the quarterback development wasn't as good as it needed to be. And I don't know that we know what kind of quarterback developer Gino Guidugli is going to be of a high school kid. He's done a nice job with the transfer kids, but this is his first crack to produce a high school kid. And the last high school kid he had to develop over multiple years was Desmond Ridder, who led them to the college football playoff, an undefeated season, and was the 3rd round NFL draft pick.
Yeah.
So I'd say that track record's good, but can he do that at Notre Dame? We're going to start to find out this season.
So this is 3 commitments in the 2027 class, right?
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
Is it pretty much the 2027? Is it 27? Like that's the priority right now based on what, where the 26 class, I mean, it's almost full, I think, at this point.
They're hoping to get Elijah Golden, who still is undecided. He's going to make his announcement on August 9th. He's a defensive lineman from Florida. But other than that, I mean, they've got 26 committed kids in the 26 class already. And, that now it's just kind of hold on, and they've already started to shift. And Sean, they started to do that in spring. We saw a lot of 27 kids on campus this spring and this summer, and some big time 5-star kids from all over the country, very talented players. And so they already started this transition. I think a lot of people think, they didn't start recruiting Teddy Jarrard till they offered him in June. They've been recruiting Teddy Jarrard for months. He just didn't offer him until June. But you're already seeing that. And, we talk to national kids and, Brian Smith, who does stuff for us at times and also works for Locked On. He'll talk to kids and travel events. And Notre Dame's is one of those new hot programs. You just talk to kids and like, oh, yeah, Notre Dame. Man, I'm talking Notre Dame. And you have to think about it. These are rising juniors, which means their entire high school lives, they've only known the Marcus Freeman era.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what you're starting to see, where Notre Dame's now one of the cool schools like Ohio State, like Oregon. And a lot of it's not only the success they've had, but the fact that they've got Marcus Freeman as the head coach. And the 27 class, the 28 class is when you're really going to start to see that.
And I think what's interesting about this, and Jesse and I started to touch on it kind of toward the end of the first segment, there was concern, obviously, when Chad Bowden goes to USC and they go out, they get Mike Martin, obviously, but the recruiting, it was slow there for a while, and everyone's going, man, what's going on here? They're going to capitalize on this momentum from the championship game and all this stuff. But I mean, feels like you can make a pretty strong case that recruiting has not dropped off, and in fact, it is even better than it was before.
It's definitely gone up, and I don't want to say that that's because Chad left. I look at it this way: Chad did a great job building them to this point.
Right.
I think it was time for him to take on a new challenge. I don't know the way that he'd build it up to this point was necessarily what was needed moving forward. I think that he was a guy that was more a great recruiting coordinator. I don't know that he was the overseer of the program that Mike Martin's going to be, which is what I think you need now in this era of NIL and portal and high school recruiting. And so I think the restructuring was necessary. So it's one of those things. For me, I'm tipping my cap to Chad Bowden saying, hey, great job. But I think this new direction is where Notre Dame needed to go. And what you're seeing is the assistant coaches more involved with recruiting than what we saw in the past. with the evaluating, with the process. There's not as much as relying on the recruiting staff to not only make evaluations, but then also to recruit players. I think that's been very effective. The recruiting staff, obviously under Mike Martin, you talk about Jordan Blake and Carter and Myron Tungvaloa-Mosa, guys like that, have also done a great job. And so you're just seeing more of a group effort now, whereas before Chad dominated it, and that worked to get him here. But I think this is why you're seeing this class that's just more balanced with high-level players. I mean, you're getting impact players at every position, and I think you combine that with a 14-2 season that ended in the national championship game. You got a much better product to sell on top of having a head coach that a lot of kids are like, I may not play at Notre Dame, but that's a guy that I would love to play for if I wasn't going to insert school.
Mm-hmm.
And that's way different than what it's been in the past.
Bryan, I need to sneak in a couple questions here. When you're evaluating a quarterback, what are the things that you look for personally?
Well, there's certain things there's certain things I can't look for that coaches need to, which is a lot of the off the field stuff. But when I look at a quarterback and I look at film, I want obviously a kid that's a competitor. I want a kid that's going to go to 7-on-7s and camps and compete. And I want a kid that plays with a swagger. I want a kid that carries himself with a presence. Those are things that you look for, during snaps and in between snaps, which is why game film is so important. Now, I want a kid that has a very repeatable delivery, even if it's, if he can throw different arm angles, but I need to see something that's repeatable. I want to see a kid that's got some athleticism to him, not necessarily as a runner, Jesse, but even if you're a pocket passer, I need to know that you've got foot quickness. You can avoid pressure. You can climb the pocket. You can spin out and do those things by time. I want to see a kid that's got, I like to see how the ball comes out of a kid's hand. I want to see a little bit of juice coming out of there. And then, of course, you want to see a guy that can process information. Is this a kid that just drops back and he's a one read and go guy? Or is he a kid that is, hitting that backside dig? Is he a kid that's maybe hitting that second level read? You want to see a kid that shows a feel for the game. Is everything a rocket, or does he understand this one needs a little bit of touch? I need to layer this one in a little bit. I need to put this one down and away a little bit, and just that overall feel for the game. And then, of course, there's the tools. What's his size? What's his strength? And those type of things. How does he run? But it's just really that all-around feel. And then as a coach, you're also looking to see what kind of character he has. Does he have a good work ethic? What do his teammates think about him? What does his coaches think about him? What do the opposing coaches think about him? Especially for quarterback. I mean, I'm talking to guidance counselors. I'm talking to janitors. Hey, this kid, you do all that stuff with a quarterback at a place like Notre Dame because you want to find out what kind of person are we recruiting. Right. And it's also, this is the face of your program.
Right.
And if this is some kid that's in the community acting like a knucklehead, is that what we want to present to the community? And you want a kid that you're going to know that your teammates are going to rally around, not a kid that you've kind of got to, convince other people. I know he's a bit of a knucklehead, but he's really good. You don't want that, especially at this position. And that's something that I know that Marcus Freeman and Mike Denbrock and Gino Gaduli all value a great deal. So when you're getting offered a quarterback by Notre Dame, there's a sense that they've done their homework on what kind of person this is, just as much as what kind of player he is.
So then my follow-up would be, what excites you the most about Teddy Jarrard's game?
Tools. Right now, they offer
right?
They offer two quarterbacks, Peyton Houston and Teddy Jarrard. Right now, Peyton Houston's a better player than Teddy Jarrard. He threw for over 4,000 yards, rushed for 600 yards, had like 60 touchdown. Teddy's a kid that you look at and you see he's got like that whipping arm motion, just real fast arm motion. When he does use his core, the ball jumps out of his hand. He's a kid that's got some mobility. Jesse, you'll love this because as a defensive player, I know this will drive you nuts. He's that kid that you think you got him. He's scrambling around. You come up, and all of a sudden he pulls up and dumps it behind you to a guy that's coming from behind that you didn't even see. He's right. He throws a great ball on the run. He's not just a sit in the pocket, and if everything's perfect, I can pick you apart. He's a competitive kid. I hear great things about his leadership, but I want to see a guy that's got the potential to be elite. He may not be elite today as a sophomore in high school, but man, Jesse, the arm is live. It's quick. It's repeatable. He can change arm angles. He's competitive. He's a good athlete, but not a runner. So he's gonna buy time, spin out of the pocket. But everybody I talk to, the thing they always tell me, this kid loves to compete. This kid loves to compete. This kid is a competitor. This kid gets after it. And that's obviously something you want. You had that last year. That's whatever you want to think about Ian Book. The one thing you can never deny, that kid was a competitor. That kid wanted to battle. And those are the guys that win at Notre Dame. And CJ Carr's that way. And Teddy Jarrard's that way.
Yeah, I think kind of like what you were talking about, the ability to whip the ball I like that he has that baseball background. He's, the
Mhm.
pitching, that sort of stuff that gives me that Patrick Mahomes feel where he can, just whip that ball at any angle, make any sort of throw, and get some sort of zip behind it, right? So,
Well, it's interesting, Jesse. Some of the most powerful throws he makes are off-platform throws where he's thrown off of his back foot, because the one big technical thing he needs to work on is he gets on that front foot way too quick. So it's like once that weight transfers to that front foot, he locks it in and he can't finish with his hips, and that's when the ball will die. But when he throws off his back foot, he gets more of the core involved, and that thing explodes out of his hand. When he throws on the run, there was a throw he made. It's about a 40-yard corner route on the run where his body is facing the sideline, and he just snaps it off. And you're like, when he starts using his core better in the pocket, you're going to see those throws regularly. But like you mentioned, he does not have a great offensive line in high school, so he's got to throw a lot of off-platform throws, and he's got some of that playground to him. And I love quarterbacks that kind of play street ball. I call it street ball, where it's like
backyard football.
Right, where it's like, dude, I'm running around, you think you got me, and then bam, I hit that thing, or I'm climbing the pocket and I'm throwing it, taking that hit. He's got a little bit of that street ball to him too, which I think in a modern quarterback is so necessary to have. Pat Mahomes has got that. Josh Allen has that. Jalen Hurts has that. Lamar Jackson has that. Riley Leonard certainly have that. And I think the to win in today's era, you need a little bit of that at quarterback.
Great stuff. We got to wrap it up with that. Teddy Jarrard committing to Notre Dame today. Bryan, give us the quick. I know the Irish Breakdown people know this, watching on the YouTube channel, but the radio audience, give them the pitch on where they can find all the details.
You got to go to boards.irishbreakdown.com. That's our premium site. That's where you can find some great stuff. I got a very deep intel behind the scenes, talking to sources, breakdown of how the quarterbacks, receivers are looking. I'll have some O-line stuff coming out today of how the summer's looked, and of course some defensive guys this weekend. Got to get that intel stuff, and you can only find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com.
All right. Sounds good. Bryan Driskell, irishbreakdown.com, talking about the Teddy Jarrard commitment. You can find out more about it there at irishbreakdown.com. Thanks, Bryan, as always.
My pleasure.
We
Always
will.
good when the boss is here.
That's right. We'll take a timeout. We'll wrap up this hour. We've got rapid fire coming up next hour as well. Plenty more Notre Dame conversation coming up here on Budweiser's Weekday Sports Beat with irishbreakdown.com. Winding down hour one of the show, Budweiser's Weekday Sports Beat, along with Irish Breakdown on Sports Radio WSBT, along with Jesse Stiers. I'm Sean Stiers. We got more Notre Dame football talk coming up in the second hour of the show. We're going to see if we can take a crack at seeing who might be some of the captains that Notre Dame has for this season. Don't forget, a lot of options for you to watch and listen to the show live. We are now live streaming on YouTube every day, whether it's the Irish Breakdown YouTube channel or the new Sports Radio WSBT YouTube channel. You can find this show on both of those YouTube platforms. You can also listen live 960 AM or 106.1 FM in southwestern Michigan, as well as the WSBT radio app. Listen to the on-demand audio at sportsradiowsbt.com. And also, you can download the podcasts from the Irish Breakdown podcast platform, wherever you get your podcasts. If you go look for Irish Breakdown in your podcast, listen there. It's just that simple. I know that you listen or watch on all of them, don't you, Jess?
Yeah, I just get on at work and I plug in my headphones and I pull up the YouTube video and I just let those bad boys roll on all day.
Go to town. Go to town. All right, we've got Notre Dame football talk and Big Ten Media Days this week. A lot of interesting stuff has come out of Big Ten Media Days, and also see what Paul Feinbaum has to say about one James Franklin. That's in hour two, Budweiser's Weekday Sports Beat with IrishBreakdown.com. Hour 2 of the show. Glad to have you with us here today. Thanks for everybody who's been hanging out, watching live on the YouTube channels, whether it's Irish Breakdown's YouTube channel or the Sports Radio WSBT YouTube channel, and of course, all of our listeners on Sports Radio WSBT and the WSBT radio app. We're rocking and rolling. Along with Jesse Stiers, I'm Sean Stiers. It's rapid fire time. It's everyone's favorite time of the day. Jesse, Eli Raridan, Emil Wagner, Jordan Faison, Jeremiah Love, Adon Schuler, and Leonard Moore were all in New York last week for Notre Dame's Media Blitz, whether it was the Today Show, Good Morning America, the ESPN shows. How many of those players do you think end up being captains for the Fighting Irish this season?
There's literally only one I feel very confident about. Do you know who I'm going to say? And for the people listening on the radio and the people live on the YouTube show who aren't familiar with my game, I got all the captains right last year.
Ooh, that's true. It's very true. You called him, didn't you?
I did. I'll help you out. Emil Wagner is the one I feel most confident about.
I think so as well. I think that, we've been talking about the fact that there is a want to make sure that I'm not muted here. I'm not, because someone just asked if they couldn't hear. We've been trying to figure out who the offensive lineman might be. Like, it feels like there's, would be an offensive lineman. And I think Emil Wagner makes perfect sense where he is. He's basically an upperclassman now. He was the guy who played the most last year. He comes into this, in an offensive line that was so inexperienced last year. And you look at the kind of guy that he is and the fact that he was on that trip to New York. I feel like he is number one on this list in terms of guys who would end up being a captain this season. You know who I would probably put right behind him, though, in terms of this list? And again, it's Raridan, Wagner, Faison, Love, Schuler, Leonard Moore. I don't think Leonard Moore would be, because he's only a sophomore, as great as he is, as a player. I would put Eli Raridan.
I knew you were going to say that. My top three are Emil Wagner, Eli Raridan, and then Jeremiah Love. Jeremiah Love has the talent and the presence. I don't know if he has the personality, the outspoken personality to be a team captain.
Because he's very, kind of, at least
even kill, quiet,
soft-spoken, which is, great in terms of actually being a player, not too high, not too low, and all that kind of stuff. So that's, because like all of these other guys, really good players, I don't know, like
a bit young,
just where some younger guys. Don Lloyd is asking in the YouTube chat, what about Greathouse? I do feel like Greathouse has a very good shot at being captain. Now, he wasn't on the New York list, so that's what, the question, I based it around the guys who were on that trip. That's why I'm asking, like, of those guys who made the trip to New York with Marcus Freeman last week, which ones could end up being captain? So I agree with you. I feel like Raridan and Wagner are the two guys I would put at the top of the list in terms of guys who I feel like have the best shot at being captain. I do feel like Greathouse has a really good shot at being captain. We've talked about Drake Bowen before, going into his junior season now, the kind of guy he is. Like, you heard Chris Ash. We heard Chris Ash talk a lot about his leadership in the spring.
I mean, there's no doubt Drake Bowen will be the defensive captain.
You're calling it right now?
There's absolutely no doubt.
Okay. All right. So would you go with those four guys as your locks? Like, do you want to, like you said, you called them last year. Do you want more time to think about it? Maybe we talk about it in the future.
We can revisit, but I feel good about Greathouse and Wagner on offense, and then Bowen definitely on defense. I struggle a little bit with who's going to be the guy on defense besides Drake Bowen. Mm-hmm. I think you have a really young secondary, so I don't envision someone from the secondary being up there. I think it's going to come down to a defensive lineman, to be honest with you. And I wouldn't be surprised if Jalen Sneed finds a way to sneak his way in there as well.
I wouldn't either. I think that's a good call as well. Like senior now. I mean, the gun show alone should get Eli Raridan much consideration. Those biceps look like that, like he's got a freaking inflation station going on there.
I'm going to give you a dark horse as well.
Okay.
Josh Burnham.
Oh, okay. That's a good one. I think that's a good dark horse. I mean, you said a defensive lineman. I think he would make perfect sense.
I mean, he's just the typical, in my opinion, just get the job done guy. He's plugged and played in a lot of different places along the defensive line. He's got the years, the experience to be here. And I just see him as someone being a vocal leader, a guy that constantly kind of leads by example. He might not be the most flashy or the most dominant at the end of the day, but I do believe, and again, everyone's getting on me for pronunciation. I'm sorry, Tommy. Tommy's back in the chat.
Silent H. Yeah, Tommy only shows up when it's time to nitpick. By the way, he sent me a direct tweet yesterday. There was a photo of him someplace rolling through Texas, and there was like a statue of some guy. He asked me where he was. My only guess, I forgot to respond. My guess would be, like maybe around Austin someplace, or, I don't know. Was it like I don't think I'd ever seen that statue like outside of San Antonio, the Alamo, or any of that kind of stuff. So I don't know. Tommy, you can let us know when you get a chance. Fill in the blank. The biggest benefit of potentially getting Jeremiah Love more involved in the passing game this season is blank.
Is explosiveness. It's absolutely explosiveness. The name of the game on offense is to get the ball into the hands of your most explosive players as many times as possible. And there is no one better than Jeremiah Love. When you get him in space, as a defender, you might as well say, good luck. I'm going to try it next time, because he has got to be the hardest guy to bring down in all of college football in open space. He's got the hurdle. He's got the stiff arm. We've seen him run through defenders like he did against Penn State. But it all comes down to the explosiveness and the quick twitch. So getting him the ball in the passing game just leads to more explosive plays.
I like that. He is definitely explosive, and that's going to be a big benefit. If you get him involved, the ability to, as you said, get an explosive guy the ball in space. I was thinking about this the other day, though, when I came up with this question. We'll see where you rank this. You're going to have a young, inexperienced quarterback. And like we've been thinking about, okay, get the ball downfield, all that kind of stuff. Get the ball downfield. Well, how about also the ability for a young quarterback to get the ball out quickly to an explosive player like that? And all of those things that you're talking about that go along with it. Just the ability to get the ball out quick for a young quarterback, not get, like too wrapped up in maybe sometimes looking downfield. What do you think about that answer?
Yeah, I think that's huge. I think that's a very close second, or if you want to go 1A, 1B, he's the security valve. Yeah. And what Notre Dame coaching staff, Gina Gaduli, Marcus Freeman, and Mike Denbrock, I guarantee what they're going to reinforce into his mind is ball safety, right? So rather than forcing a pass downfield, oh, there's my Heisman running back down in the flats. Here you go. I'm just going to dump the ball down to you, and you can make a play out of this situation. So he is going to be – he's the most important player on the entire Notre Dame roster. And how he's used between running the ball, catching the ball, pass blocking, providing that sense of security for CJ Carr, he's all of the above. And we talked about him being not necessarily a captain because he's outspoken. I don't mind that. He's just so even-keeled. I don't think that there's anything that you can do to really get under Jeremiah Love's skin just because of how good a football player he is.
Correct. Archer 452 rides again in the YouTube chat, says, asks if we think Love will ever line up in the slot this
I don't think he'll start
I anticipate that happening. Yeah, but like he would line up in the slot. Right.
Or he lines up in the slot and they motion him to the backfield.
We saw him do it in the spring, so I'll be curious if they're still doing it this fall, because that is 2 springs in a row where they have worked him at wide receiver. And it still feels like with the depth of talent in that running back room, you need to find a way to get multiples of those guys on the field. And the easiest way to do that is to have Jadarian Price and Love both out there, with Love, as you said, whether it's motioning out of the backfield, going wherever, or just lining up in the
Don't do this to me. Don't tease Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love 2-back sets.
I know.
Don't do that to me.
Tease it all the time. By the way,
the thing
Tom,
is,
go ahead.
When you line Jeremiah Love up in the slot, you don't even have to run a play that's designed for him, because defenses are going to go alert, 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 alert.
Yeah.
And then even if you motion him,
for him. Yeah.
You can get a sense of, are we in man? Are we in zone? And if they do line up in the slot, it's going to be a very specific look. They are looking to capitalize on a mismatch. So anytime you see, just like those defenses, anytime you see Jeremiah Love not in the backfield, your alert radars should be going off for something. Mm-hmm. The play doesn't even have to be designed for him, but you know that the eyes are on him. The defense is, moving or shifting coverage because of him. He's just that kind of player on the offensive side of the ball.
By the way, Tommy said he was Sam Houston was the statue yesterday in Texas. There you go. Ray Horton, thank you for the YouTube super chats. He says, awesome, you guys are getting more recognition for the hard work you do. IB Nation is number one, and it is Budweiser's weekday sports beat, along with Irish Breakdown / IB Nation. However you want to look at it, that's how you look at it. So we found out speaking of Jeremiah Love, found out an interesting tidbit on him during the trip to New York last week for Notre Dame. He was on College Football Live on ESPN, where his teammate Isaiah Dunn is doing an internship this summer, and they talked about a little project that Jay Love's working on.
You've been balling on and off the field, especially with your comic book. I saw him checking it out, but it's been awesome. I don't know.
Tell us about the comic book.
I got a comic book coming out. It's called Jarrard Monstar. Basically, it's just my way of telling, my story in like a little fun way, in a comic way. I grew up watching anime. I love comics. I just love like the whole, just everything about like just comics and manga and, Marvel, DC, like everything about it I think is very, very cool. So, me and my dad got together and, just thought of an idea to, bring, a comic to life. And that's what Jarrard Monstar is. Just telling my life through a comic form. It's for all ages, really. Just want to give back to football. Jarrard Monstar is coming out in September. And, just my life story in a comic form. And I'm just hoping everybody's going to enjoy it.
Jarrard Monstar, the comic book. What do you think about Jarrard Monstar? Never knew this about Jeremiah Love.
Well, first of all, he looks like an anime guy. That did not surprise me. Like, this is like, if you know anything about like anime comic people, they're kind of quiet, not antisocial, but kind of just like sitting in a room by themselves, watching comics, maybe drawing their own comics at the end of the day. So this is very on par for Jeremiah Love and his personality, I would say. This doesn't surprise me a whole lot.
When you lay it out like that, it does make a lot of sense when you think about his personality.
That's what I mean.
I'm going to have to ask some questions about this in terms of, when we get to talk to the running backs, in terms of like, is he actually doing the drawing, like the animation for this whole thing? Because they showed, kind of some clips, and he went to a comic book. I don't know if it was a convention, but some kind of comic book store or something like that while he was out there too. It sounds really cool.
It does, but I like the name Jarrard Monstar. And I think that I will like it even more knowing the context of the comic, right? Like when I look at it at first, when you think of Jeremiah Love, like Jarrard Monstar isn't what kind of maybe comes to mind. I think of like the quickness, like the flash ability, I think at the end of the day. So I think that this name will coincide very well with the comic. I just haven't obviously had the opportunity to read it yet. But it makes sense. He's a freaking monster on the field.
I think it does. I don't think it comes out actually until September. So we'll have to get some specifics on when and where and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure once it does, especially because of NIL, he'll probably, do some kind of event here around campus or around town or something like that to sell Jarrard Monstar, the comic book. as well. Very cool from Jeremiah Love. Jeremiah Monstar coming your way. We have South Bend Cubs baseball coming up, and we will be going over and checking in about 20 minutes here. But we're going to take a timeout first, and then we'll continue with rapid fire. We've got some comments from Paul Feinbaum on James Franklin, and we'll also hear some comments from Tony Petitti and Kurt Signetti from Big Ten Media Days this week. That's next when we continue with more rapid fire. Forgot to hit a button there. We continue with more rapid fire as we roll on through on Sports Radio WSBT as well as IrishBreakdown.com. South Bend Cubs baseball coming up here in a few minutes. Let's hear from Paul Feinbaum. You know, sometimes it's like you hear, well, Paul Feinbaum's got something to say. Do you really want to hear what he had to say? In this case, I think that this might put a smile on a lot of different people's faces. He was on ESPN's Get Up, and he had this to say to Mike Greenberg about Penn State head coach James Franklin.
Now, listen, I'm not one that likes to equivocate, but on January 20th, if I'm sitting here eating my words, Greeny, I will be the most shocked person on the face of the earth. James Franklin and Penn State will not win the national championship. It has nothing to do with the team. They're excellent. They're fantastic. It's the best team that he has had. But they still have the problem that they've had since James Franklin arrived from Vanderbilt. They have James Franklin as the head coach. And while he is a very good coach, his record speaks for itself. He is incapable, Greeny, of winning that last game. We saw it last year when he blew a 10-point lead against Ohio State. He blew a 10-point lead against Notre Dame. And I'm getting sick and tired of talking about the leads he has blown, but he's done nothing to convince me otherwise.
All right, there you go. Jesse, do you have any disagreements with Paul Feinbaum?
I have no disagreements with Mr. Feinbaum, and that might be the first time that statement has ever come out of my mouth. And I need to ask you something. What is that big old word he used at the beginning? Equivalent? Like what does that word even mean?
Just answer the question.
Man, he's always using these big words that I have no idea what they mean. Just give me those simple football words at the end of the day. But Paul Feinbaum, nothing he said was wrong. He just has a way about going about things, like just on ESPN's Get Up, just completely roasting James Franklin, So, but nothing he said was wrong. James Franklin is the modern day Brian Kelly, if we're being honest. He wins a lot of regular season games. He piles on the 10-win, 11-win, 9-win seasons. But when it really matters most against those top opponents in the playoffs, the New Year's 6 bowl games, or even just a regular season top 25, top 10 matchup, James Franklin cannot get the job done. And
yes,
this is why it hurts so many so many Penn State fans. This is why James Franklin thought there was a need to take shots at Marcus Freeman during their press conference. He's jealous of Notre Dame overcoming their obstacles before Penn State did at the end of the day.
And that's what ended up happening. Like Feinbaum said, he blew a 10-point lead to him in the semifinals. I have every expectation they're going to be back in the championship, or not in the championship, in the college football playoff this season. And Don says Paul Feinbaum spoke the truth. And that's basically what equivocate means. Like, he's not going to dance around the truth. He's, like, he's going to come out and he's going to straight shoot, and he's going to tell you what he thinks, So, and that's what James Franklin is. And, my follow-up into this, like, do you lump Brian? Like, really, James Franklin and Brian Kelly are the same coach. Which of them has ever won a big game? Outside of Brian Kelly winning a couple national championships at the Division II level. At the big boy level, what have either one of them done? What have either one of them done? And there's no reason right now to think that James Franklin is going to all of a sudden start winning big games. Look at Penn State's schedule. They're going to be in the playoff because they play a very easy schedule. And if all they lose is 2 games, which I think that they're going to either lose 1 or 2 games because their schedule is so relatively soft, they're going to be in the playoff. They're going to be ranked relatively high. They've got all this back. They've got Drew Aller in the whole thing. But at the end of the day, they can't win big games. That's what it is.
I need people, Tommy Guns should have been like a high school English teacher with all this grammar and words he knows.
I know.
Maybe he came into the wrong calling. I need him to go back, coach some high school English, and coach some fullbacks as a position coach.
Maybe that's what he needs to do. I don't disagree with that. All right, so Big Ten Media Day started this week in Las Vegas because, of course, when you think Big Ten, you think Las Vegas, and it's been eventful this week. One of the big talking points continues to be the number of conference games that are being played. The Big Ten and the Big 12 each play 9, while the SEC and the ACC play 8 conference games. So there's the setup. Now, fill in the blank. Big Ten Commissioner Tony Petitti said this, quote, "If you're 6-3 in the Big Ten, I would argue that's a good record. If you stumble in the non-conference, I don't know why that would disqualify you from playoff contention." And that, Jesse, is blank.
That's just a hot, steaming pile of crap at the end of the day, because the Big Ten is so much more top-heavy compared to the SEC, and I'm tired of the Big Ten thinking that they're all of a sudden big dogs and in the same playing field with the SEC. You're not, And if you're the Big Ten and you're complaining about the 9 games compared to the 8, Well, why don't you go back to your own commissioner and your own, like they set that up. No one forced you to do that besides your own conference commissioner, you know?
Right.
And so if you want to be like the SEC, well, how about you get a little bit smarter and come up with, you know, a schedule that has 8 conference games and 4 non-conference games. So I don't think a 6-3 record in the Big Ten is super great. Like, is it good? Sure. But if you're the Michigans, if you're the Ohio States, if you're the Penn States, that's not a good record. But that's the thing is there's only consistently 3, maybe 4 teams in the top of the Big Ten every year. And the rest of them are just a cycle. And you're not playing this. Not many teams have to play Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan all in the same season. And I'm not even going to include USC in that list yet because they're simply not back. They're not one of those better schools. And so, yeah, Oregon is up there now. But, you know, of traditional, the Big Ten is just so top heavy to me.
No, it's absolutely top heavy. And the other thing is we need to dispel the myth that just because you're playing more conference games means you're playing better competition.
Correct.
That is like the Big Ten and Tony Petitti. Yeah, I mean, he's making the pitch for his conference, but that is not the truth. I'm gonna read you. I'm gonna give you here the schedule of a Big Ten team and the schedule of an SEC team. Remember, the Big Ten team is playing 9 conference games. The SEC team is playing 8 conference games, and you tell me if they're equal. Here's the schedule of the Big Ten team: Oregon, UCLA, Northwestern, Iowa, Ohio State, Indiana, Michigan State, Nebraska, and Rutgers. Okay, so again, you got 2 tough games on that schedule, right? Maybe 2.5 if you include Indiana. We don't know if Indiana is going to come close to duplicating what they did last year. So that's the Big Ten team. Here's the SEC team. Here's their schedule. One fewer game. Auburn, Texas, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Alabama, Missouri, LSU. Whose schedule would you rather have?
Not any of those SEC schools.
And the Penn State school, or the Big Ten school, the schedule that I read was Penn State's. We were just talking about how soft Penn State's conference schedule is this year. Oregon, Ohio State, Indiana. It comes down to that.
Well, the thing is they diluted it even more.
Is the SEC school that I just read. And somebody asked yesterday about Oklahoma being a top 8 seed in the college football playoff. There's no way they will be because of the schedule that they play this year. They could be better this year, but they're not going to be playoff worthy because of the schedule that schedule that I just read that they're going to play. Auburn, Texas, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Alabama, Missouri, LSU. There's no way. And again, here's Purdue's conference schedule. Compare it to what I just read for Penn State. USC, Illinois, Minnesota, Northwestern, Rutgers, Michigan, Ohio State, Washington, Indiana.
Oof.
Second year in a row, Purdue has been saddled with a tougher conference schedule than any of the contenders in the Big Ten. And there you go.
It's a wash.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is you added more of these schools, and I mean, yeah, Oregon was good, but the rest is just more dilution, you know? Like you're just adding to more of the problem by diluting your middle to bottom tier schools. No one wants to play an SEC school, you know? Like I'm more worried about Notre Dame playing Arkansas than I would be like Notre Dame playing Michigan State this season, Purdue, you know? So like, I don't know what you want me to say.
If you're not playing Ohio State, Penn State, maybe Michigan, like what you were saying with the Big Ten being so top heavy, if you're not playing one of those 3 teams, like I think you take your chances any given week. Oregon, I forgot about Oregon. See, and I keep forgetting, you know, about those West Coast teams being part of the Big Ten now. Oregon is obviously in that picture as well, but it's very top heavy. But Petitti and that conference keep wanting to act like, oh, we're playing this extra game, and it's so tough because we're playing this extra game in conference. And Everyone should be like us. Speaking of which, everyone's favorite braggart, Indiana head coach Curt Cignetti, was asked about the recent decision to drop their home-and-home series against Virginia, and he said, quote, "We figure we'd adopt an SEC scheduling philosophy," end quote. Then he goes on to mention how many SEC teams play FCS opponents and that the SEC only plays 8 league games. Meanwhile, new Purdue head coach Barry Odom, who, of course, Purdue played Notre Dame last year. They're going to play him this year. They're going to play him again next year as well. They also played Oregon State last year. But Barry Odom from Purdue was asked about their scheduling philosophy, and he said, quote, "I could take the approach of one of the other schools in the state, cancel games and do some of those things, but the schedule is what it is," end quote. So my question, is Barry Odom the hero that we needed, Jesse? Is he the prince who was promised?
He is the prince who was promised, because anyone who can stand up there and deflect those Curt Cignetti one-liners that he's so good at, I think deserves to be deemed the prince at the end of the day. But it's just typical Curt Cignetti, man. Let me get up here, let me get on the big platform, let me remind you that I'm Curt Cignetti, and then let me rip something right out of my lips that he knows is just going to stir the pot right up. All right, Curt, why don't you go down to the SEC then and take over for Brian Kelly and see how you fare in an SEC schedule. And not even that, but just the expectations, like he's at IU. Anything they do at IU is going to be seen as golden, right? Go down to LSU and have an 8-4 season and see how the boosters feel about you. It's just the pressure is different because the football is different.
And that's the thing. Indiana could go 8-4 this year. And by Indiana standards, they would have been throwing a party last year if they went 8-4, let alone made it to the playoff. I don't know what the reception will be this year if they go 8-4, but they should still be doing cartwheels in Bloomington because it's Indiana football. Now, do I think they'll end up 8-4? Probably not. But again, they had to bring in a ton of guys from the portal last year to put that thing together and do what they did.
Favorable schedule too.
Yeah, it's a very favorable schedule. I just ripped through Purdue's schedule. And again, in the Big Ten, Purdue plays USC, Illinois, Michigan, Washington, Indiana, Minnesota, Rutgers. That is 3 teams that have been in the playoff in the last 2 years, as well as a team that many think, Illinois, could be a playoff team this year, as well as Minnesota, which should be pretty good this year. That's Purdue's schedule this season. Indiana plays Illinois, Iowa, Oregon, Penn State. Those are their 4 toughest non-conference games. So again, they shouldn't be a 4-loss team, and they shouldn't even be a 3-loss team. But if they are a 3-loss team with that schedule, they're not getting into the playoff, going back to what Tony Petitti was saying.
Oh, 100%. And if you're Curt Cignetti, what are you really saying by, we're not going to play Virginia, but we're going to play Jackson State or something? You're really scared about Virginia. If you're this top dog after coming off the playoff, what's Virginia to you at the end of the day? It should be
right.
Another just game that you handle.
You beat all these ranked teams last year. Why are you scared of Virginia? He claims to have this "we'll play anybody, anywhere, anytime" attitude, but that's not the way they are. They dumbed down the schedule last year when he got the job. When they got rid of Louisville and they added Indiana State to the schedule. Now they're adding, Kennesaw State, and they've got Old Dominion on the schedule, and they're still playing Indiana State. So
I just made up a team, by the way. A lot of people are giving me flack for I made up a team, an equivalent team.
What did you say?
I said Jackson State, but people are like, "Oh, do you not have Google?" I know that it's an equivalent team. It's I know it's not Jackson State, but I couldn't think off the top.
It's an FCS level team. That's what he meant, like the Jackson States of the world. We'll end on this note. Terry Bollea, better known as Hulk Hogan, died today, 71. It has been a brutal week. Hulk Hogan, Ozzy Osbourne, Malcolm Jamal Warner from The Cosby Show, all passing away this week. The Hulk Hogan thing, apparently there was some talk about like his health was failing, and I saw that, his agent and some other people were trying to deny it. And obviously you can't quite deny it. Apparently he died of cardiac arrest.
That's unfortunate. Sorry, I wasn't laughing about that. I was laughing about a comment in the chat, but I did read that thing yesterday where I was like, everyone's like, oh, he's in good health. There's nothing to worry about. And then all of a sudden today, it's just got the notification, and that's what it is. Who was more legendary to you, Ozzy Osbourne or Hulk Hogan?
Ooh, I've got to go Hulk Hogan with that one. Like I was never a big Ozzy guy. There's a few songs that I like of Ozzy's, and obviously he goes all the way back to Megadeth. I think what I knew more about Ozzy was when he was doing the do you remember the Osbournes from a few years ago when they were
my mom watched that show.
Yep, that's right. That's like they were kind of that family, the Osbournes, kind of a pioneer in the reality show world. Like even before the Kardashians, there was the Osbournes.
They kind of started the trend of family drama TV.
That's right. And then you picked it up and ran with it, right? But like Hulk Hogan from my childhood in the 80s, WrestleMania and all that stuff. And there was like rock and wrestling, and you had Hulk Hogan and you had Mr. T, and of course, all the other guys, and then the heel turn later on his career in the whole thing. And then he just kind of turned out to be a jerk when it was all said and done. But he was a hero of a lot of people back in the 80s with the rise of the WWF, now the WWE. We will wrap it up with that, Jess. Good stuff as always. You'll be back on tomorrow's show. A couple new members of the show will be here tomorrow as well. That's right. Thunder Lips, baby. Thunder Lips, as Craig says from Rocky 3. We'll wrap it up with that. We've got South Bend Cubs baseball on the way. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Budweiser's Weekday Sports Beat with Irish Breakdown here on Sports Radio WSBT.